Hello everyone and welcome back again to another one of these videos where we are going to be looking at different types of projects based on this repo app ideas where everything is organized into different tiers depending on your skill level, and my goal is to be doing all these different projects, doing them with the community, walking you all through it the way I think about it, in the hopes that not only I will continue to hone my own skills, but see if we can knock every single one of these ones out. So far it's been really fun. I've had a lot of fun doing it. Hope you've all felt the same way. And it turns out today when I was picking my random one, well, of course, I landed on the first one here, which is a simple binary to decimal converter. So like we normally do, let's go ahead and get started. Let's read what the project is about, and let's go ahead and start getting our hands dirty. So bin to dec. Binary is the number system all digital computers are based on. Therefore, it's important for developers to understand binary or base 2 mathematics. The purpose of bin2des is to provide practice and understanding of how binary calculations, I'm assuming they meant work after that. Bin2decimal allows the user to enter strings of up to 8 binary digits, zeros and ones in any sequence, and then displays its decimal equivalent. This challenge requires the developer implementing it follow these constraints. Arrays may not be used to contain the binary digits entered by the user. Determining the decimal equivalent of a particular binary digit in the sequence must be calculated using a single mathematical function, for example, the natural logarithm. It's up to you to figure out which function to use. User can enter up to 8 binary digits in one input field. These are user stories, by the way. User must be notified if anything other than a 0 or 1 was entered. User views the results in a single output field containing the decimal base 10 equivalent of the binary number that was entered. And then bonus features, user can enter a variable number of binary digits. We have some useful links and resources, and of course a lot of sample projects to go off of. So I think this is good. I like it. It's straightforward. So let's go ahead and get started with our HTML. All right, so here I am in Visual Studio Code. I've already created a folder for this project, bin2decimal. And the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is create my index.html file. Now, you've all seen me use this abbreviation before. The Emmet abbreviation is a plugin that comes with Visual Studio Code. And of course, if you just type down one exclamation mark, you already get this nice HTML5 compliant scaffold ready for you to start building your code on top of. So I'm simply going to call this bin2desc. And I'm thinking in here, I will have, let's say, I'm going to have a form. Don't really care about the action. Inside of this form, I'm going to have, let's see, I'll have a label and an input. I'll have another label. Actually, let's just copy this one. I don't have a button of type. Can we just do this? No. Okay. Nope. Button. We'll make this a type of button since we don't want to necessarily submit this form. This will be for convert. This will be our binary input. So we'll also call this binary. This will be our decimal. We'll also call this decimal. While we're here, we know the minimum length right now, or rather the max length for this input needs to be 8. So we can actually set that through one of these attributes here. So let's make that 8. And this is pretty much it as far as this goes. Maybe up here we'll also add a header and say binary to decimal converter. Something nice right there just to get started. So let me reload Visual Studio so I can get my live server up and running here. You can see it starting down here. Let me kick that off. It's going to open up on port 5500. So let's go back to the browser here, open up a new tab, and here we go. Now this is really zoomed in, so binary to decimal converter. Looks like we have the label for binary, but I forgot the one for decimal, so let's go ahead and change that. I also want this to be capitalized. Let's do that. Let's go back to our browser, and now we see we have a input for binary and an input for decimal. Now here, let's see. Perfect. Exactly what we want. Well, is this zero-based index? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, perfect. Looks like we're off to a good start. So what else can we do here? Actually, I don't really want the user to be able to put anything instead of decimal or binary. Binary for sure, but not decimal. Also, these shouldn't be of type text. They should be of type number. And actually, what do we get here? Number, password, hidden, date, time, telephone, week. Let's make both of these numbers. But I want this one. Is there like a read only? Ooh, read only. Nice. So if we come back to our browser here and refresh. Okay, so you'll notice that I can only put numbers in here, and inside of decimal, I actually can't enter anything. So that's nice. I only want it to be read only. I'll put something in there myself once the conversion has been done. Awesome. So that completes the HTML section. So let's go ahead and continue on now to our CSS section. Now, before we actually move on, one thing I forgot to mention is I do want to make this a Git repository just so that we can keep track of the changes that we're making to our project over time. So I'll do git init to initialize this as an empty Git repository. And now if I do git status, you can see we have this untracked index HTML file. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'll use the shorthand for committing, and I'll say initial HTML file complete. This way, if we ever need to revert, if we use git log, we'll now see that we have this commit hash that we can actually revert back to in case things go terribly wrong in the future. And I really want to hone this in for people watching. If you make sure that you're committing often and you make sure that those commits are complete, then you know if you ever need to go back to it, you can actually get back to a moment where things are working well. Now, if you're committing something just for the sake of committing it, but you still have some errors you're working out on, it's going to be really hard if you have to context switch back to a state where things weren't working. So at that moment, I might encourage you to do like a stash just for, you don't want to necessarily commit just to commit, but you still want to save the changes to come back to them later. Just trying to impart some words of wisdom on you all. All right, so continuing on with our CSS, I see that I actually made this right here. I want to make sure this is for binary. So let's go ahead and start creating our file structure here. If you all know, I'm a little bit fond of BEM, block element modifier. So the way that I like to structure my directory is by creating a folder called pages. Inside of here, I have my index CSS, which corresponds to my index HTML page. If I had other pages like about.html or contact.html, I might have different pages like about.css and contact.css. Similarly, for my blocks, as part of block element modifier, I'll create a new directory called blocks. And my first block will be this body I have here, and I'm going to actually give it a class of, why don't we just actually call it body, just to be true to what it is, right? So we have body class body. Inside of here, I want to create a new main element with a class of main. And I'll be using that main class to center things and also have a separate container to use Flexbox on. And we'll see that in a moment. So let me close this terminal window to get some more real estate. Now inside of block, I'll create two new blocks, one of them called body and another one called main. Each one of these will have their own corresponding CSS file, so main.css and body.css, and we'll also have to make sure we import these inside of our page. Now this is nice because now our pages are the ones that handle all the different CSS, so we don't really have to worry about it. Anything that's respective to that page will belong to that page. So it's a nice way to sort of think about it. Inside of body, what do I want to do? I want to make my margin 0. I want to give it a height of 100 view height. I also want to set this to display of flex. And inside of main.css, I want to give this a margin auto so we have some nice centering on the page. So let's see what happens now if we go back. Well, of course, nothing's going to happen, right? Why do you think that is? Well, it's happening because I actually haven't linked my CSS yet. So let me come over here. Let's go to pages, index.css, go right back to the browser. Now you can see things are beginning to look a little more centered, which is nice. Perfect. So now I would like if I can get these to be sort of stacked on top of one another. I'm not sure I really like how this looks. Similar with the labels. So let's go ahead and see what we can do about that. Let's go back to our VS Code here. Now, I could make both of these div containers just for the sake of having them each be on their own line, or I can also, let's think for a second here. Why don't we start off with that and see what that gives us. So here we're using the HTML to instruct how our page should look. We're not even using CSS at this moment right now. Let's go right back to our browser here. Okay, so now things are all on their own line. So looking a little bit better now. Come back to our code. Now maybe I want to give a little more space to each one of these. So maybe here I can give this a class of main form. And then here, what can we call this? Main form section doesn't really sound great. If I'm going to give it a name of section, I feel like I should at least name all these section and then give here main form section. Let's do that. Main form section. So inside of main, we'll create a new folder because now we have new elements. We'll have to say form section. Instead of here, we'll have main form section.css, and it's inside of main CSS, we will have form section, since main should know about its section, right? That's what we'll go ahead and create about that. Main form section. Let's see, each one of these, let's say they have a margin top of 1 rem. Main form section. Let's come back to our browser and see how things are looking. So slightly better. We have some spacing now between our different inputs, and I also want some spacing, the same type of spacing on the button. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. Let's give this a class of main form button. I'll have to create the same folder structure. Form button, main form button, main form button, margin top 1 rem, and of course in here I'll have to do the same. All right, see what that does for us. All right, so now we're getting some more spacing. Things are starting to look a little bit nicer. Let's see what else we can do here. Let's give some styling to the actual main section. Come back to our code. What if for main CSS we give it a 3-pixel solid black border with padding of also 1 rem? Right, things are looking a little bit better. Let me actually zoom in here so we have a better look at how all this stuff is looking. And I think I also want to add some fonts to make this a little nicer. I'm a huge fan of this font called Inconsolata, I think. Yeah, Inconsolata. So I'm going to go ahead and get the 400 and the 700 from Google Fonts. And I'll use the import and I'll show you why. The same way we've been importing, from pages and blocks, I'm going to create a new folder here called vendor, which contains things from different vendors, one of those vendors being Google Fonts. And here I can actually include my import statement the same way we've been doing everything else. And now in my pages, the first thing I want to import is my fonts. That way I can actually use those fonts elsewhere. Now if we go back to Google, we can get the font family declaration to use inside of our rule. And if we come back to say content, body rather, let's do that. See how things are starting to look now. Okay, a little bit nicer. I do have to change the font of the input and the button. So let's go ahead and make those changes now. So the input, do I have a way to get the input yet? Not yet, but I do have a way to get the button. So main form button, say that, and then here we can say input main form section input. Right, copy this form section input. We'll have to create a new folder again. So form section input. All right, let's create our main form section input.css, main form section input. We'll have our form family that I can just take from here. Font family, apologies. Inside of here, main form section inputs. I do like keeping things alphabetized, so we'll keep that there. Let's come back to our browser. And now see we have that font family on our button. And also if we type in some numbers, we have the same font family there. So this is looking pretty good. I like the way this is right now. It's simple, but it's to the point, and it's exactly what we need to continue on. So let's get on to our JavaScript now, and let's see what we can do with that. All right, now to the fun stuff. Before I move on, I want to make sure that we take a snapshot of everything we have so far. So if we do a git status, you'll see we have all these new changes that we've made. So I'll go ahead and add them to our staging area. I'll again use the same shorthand, and I'll say CSS complete along with them file structure. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and create our scripts folder. Inside of here, I'll create my index.js. Similarly to pages, different pages can have different script files, just like they can have different styling files. Inside of our HTML, I'll actually include the script up here, something that you might not be used to seeing. Normally, you're advised to include a script before the end of the body tag. That way, the whole HTML can load beforehand. But if we use the defer attribute, it will make sure the HTML is parsed and loaded in before the JavaScript is executed. Let's go ahead and think about what we need to do. The first thing we should do is get access to the binary number that the user has entered in our form. And I also want to make it so that we should get some idea if, have they actually included a number here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come back to VS Code here, and I'm actually going to change some things around. This one, I am now going to make it a submit, and I'm going to set the attribute on this first input here as required. Okay. Now, this is a submit, and because the browser's default action is to actually submit this form to some server, I don't want for that to happen. So what is it that I have to do? Well, I have to make sure that for my form, we prevent the default event of submit from occurring. And we can do that through JavaScript. So let's copy the class here for this form, and inside of our JavaScript, let's do const main form is document query selector. We're going to use that main form query selector, and now we're going to add an event listener. And the event we want to listen to is submit. And for the event that we get, we want to make sure that we prevent the default from occurring. Okay? So let's start from there and let's see what happens. Back in our browser, let's open the tools here just to make sure we have no issues. We see index.js being loaded. All is good. If I try now to click convert, you see that it says, please fill out this field. That's great. If I enter it, cool, it's not being submitted. I can click on the button, so now we get some nice browser validation, and we are preventing the default submit event from occurring. Now let's actually get access to this form here, or rather this element as part of the form. Back in VS Code, I'm going to go to my index.html, and I'm going to give a name to this here. So just to make this a little bit easier to read, since now there are a lot of different attributes on this input, I'm going to start just making things on their own line. And just to be consistent with both, I will do the same for the next input. too far back there. Here, I'll give this a name of binary. So that way in here, when we submit, well, let's see what we can do. Let's add some curly braces here. So now we can add more of a function body. And here we want to say const binary value equals main form dot elements. Here, let's get the binary dot value. So what's it saying? For the elements inside of our main form, look for the one with the name of binary and give me the value of that. Let's go back to our browser. Let's see if I set a breakpoint here, what happens. Look at that. Binary value is now 1, 2, 3. That's awesome. Cool. If we now go back here, let's see what it's telling us. User can enter up to 8 binary digits in one input field. User must be notified if anything other than a 0 or 1 was entered. Okay, so some things I want to do here. If anything other than a 0 or 1 was entered, let's think about what we can do. I would like to definitely notify them, so possibly maybe like an alert message. And should I actually prevent, well, let's see what we can do. We can say alert user, highlight field as invalid. So let's do that, right? Let's say binary value dot for each. Now remember, this is a string, so we need to actually split this if we want to look through each one. So let's do split for each digit. Now let's say if digit is, oh, can you believe this? I have been typing this whole time and you've all been seeing a website. Okay, so I've written down here 2 comments of alert user and highlight field as invalid if that's the case. So I'm going to split this string that we have here to get an array. Then I'm going to loop through that array, and for each digit, I want to check if that digit is a 1 or 0. So if the digit is not equal to a 0 and not equal to a 1, let's say alert, please enter a valid binary digit. And here, I actually want to return. Although this, well, let's see what happens, right? Come back to our browser, decimal. Let me reset the zoom here a little bit. There you go. Let us enter in a number now. So let's do 1002. Let's see what happens. Please enter a valid binary digit. Continue. But this event prevent default is still happening. So, which by the way, I should probably move that earlier to the top. It doesn't need to be so low. Should be one of the first things we do. So we can't actually return it because here we're returning from the callback, but we're not actually returning from, the function itself. So we need to figure out a different way to accomplish this, and that's all right. Okay, so we have now a way for it to know that it's not valid. I would like to notify the user of such a thing, and we can do that using helper classes. So how can we mark? We probably should figure out if there's a way to mark an input as valid or invalid. And on top of that, we can actually give these inputs. If we go to main form section input, we can actually give these, we can say invalid border 1px solid red. So let's see what we can do here. How about here? Let's get access to our binary input. Okay. So let's say here we'll actually use we can use the ID for this. So let's say, well, I'll keep the form and then I'll keep inputs second. So binary input document get element by ID. Let's go ahead and do that binary. And then for binary input, let's see what we get here. Title, text content. And this is a type of, so what I'm trying to figure out is, can we set the validity of this input ourselves? Can we not? Well, perhaps we can circle back to this in a bit, and that way we can probably finish the majority of the application before moving on to checking for validity in different edge cases. So let's continue on here. Let's assume that we enter in everything just fine. So on top of that, let's actually get our decimal input. Here we have our binary value. And then let's say here the decimal value equals, we can actually use this great method called parseInt. We'll actually take the binary value and we can say that radix, value between 2 and 36, that specifies the base of the number in numString. This is a binary number. We want to convert it to an integer. So now we can say decimal input dot value equals decimal value. Come back to our browser. Right, so we're already starting to get some of that invalid styling here, which we'll come back to in a moment. But let's see what happens if we mess with this a little bit. So now you can see that we're already getting this converter to work. These are the happy cases. Cool. All right, so let's come back and let's figure out ways that we can improve upon this and alert the user and gives them some visual cues on things they can do in case things go wrong. Okay, so continuing on how we can give some visual cues to the user and improve upon our app a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove these pseudo classes and create my own BEM modifiers. So this is what we're going to do. Inside of form section input, I'd like to have a modifier that is, let's say, we can say validity invalid. Validity invalid. Now I wonder if inside of here, validity invalid, maybe I'll create a folder in here with just validity, but I'll have form section input validity invalid.css. I'm just going to rename this to copy it. I'll also have validity valid.css. So now we have two of these different modifiers. So valid form section input validity main form section. That's the part that we missed out on. Main form section input validity. It's a heck of a name, but it will do. Okay, so form section input validity invalid. This is going to have a border of solid red, while as the valid one will have a border of green. Okay, Now inside of section input, this is what needs to know about its own modifiers. So we'll do that one first. Import URL validity valid. Perfect. Okay, now if we go back to our JavaScript, let's remove some of these. Here's what we can do for this part. We can create a new variable called valid, initially set it equal to true, give them the benefit of the doubt. If something goes wrong here, let's set valid equal to false. And then here we only want to do this if valid is true. Okay. So let's see what we have here. We have valid true. We do our check here only and only if it's valid. We can do that. Now inside of here, we can actually add something to our binary input, and we can say binary input dot class list dot add, and now we'll go back to that class that we just created. We'll add this guy, invalid. Now, I'm thinking about it now. It might not make sense to show when it's valid. I mean, it's valid if it's not invalid. So thinking about it now, I think I'll actually just go ahead and delete this class. I'll also remove it from this file here. And that way, when we come back to our index.js, when things are valid, we can actually just remove that class. So let's go back to the browser now. Let's see what we have here. So let's do 1117. If we do 2, please enter a valid binary digit. And now this is red, showing us that it's actually invalid. If I do this, 7, we see the red has now gone away. So this is a nice way for us just to get a little bit of a visual cue that things are actually wrong. So let's see what else we can do here now. I think one of the bonus features mentions something about us being able to do a variable amount of digits, and that's a fairly simple fix. What we'd have to do is inside of our HTML here, we can just remove the max length attribute. Now if we go back to our browser, let us go crazy here. See what happens. There you go. 352,143. So we have just created a very simple binary to decimal converter. It's a nice way for us just to get some very basic practice with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We did some solid work with JavaScript, and in the following video, I will actually just do some light refactoring, see if we can't improve upon the work that we have currently. See you all in a moment. All right, so let's continue on to some small changes we can make here just to make our code a little bit easier to read. One of the first things I want to do is make a new method that will just help us toggle the validity. So instead of having to just use this raw class list here, even though we're still going to be using that method, we can just sort of abstract that to its own method here. So toggle validity. Let's see if our, I'm actually just going to do this. The first thing I want to do is actually check for if it's already there. We can just remove it, else we'll add it. So here we can say contains. If our class list contains invalid, then let's just actually go ahead and remove it, and then we'll return so that we don't actually just continue on here and add it again. And then anywhere now that we're using this, we can just say toggle validity. So let's do that. Toggle validity. Now inside of here, we don't really need to split the string. I'm also just going to remove this comment while I'm here, but I don't really need to split the string to make this change. We can actually use a for const, let's say digit of binary value. We can look at all the different digits here, and we can take this here. If the digit is not equal to 0 and digit's not equal to 1, we're going to alert them. I'm going to set the validity equal to false, and we'll also return. That way we don't continue on with the rest of the function. So we can actually remove this now, put all these together. Okay, valid equals true. Here, we don't also need to create this extra variable here since we're not really doing anything else with it. So we might as well just replace it down here. Oh, just to get a little bit more clean there. All right, so this is looking good now. And now one of the nice things I like doing too is I like adding some very basic JS documentation. So here we can actually remove the returns since that function does not return anything. And we can say toggles the validity state of the binary input depending on modifier classes. Similarly in here, handles the submit event of the main form. All right, so user submits a form, get the binary value from the element as part of the form, and we set valid equal to true. We start looking through all of the different digits inside of the binary value. If one of them is not 0 or 1, we alert the user, tell them to please enter a valid binary digit. We toggle the validity, we set it equal to false, and then return. Next time around, it's true. If it never comes in here, valid is still true. And there you go. Toggle the validity, set it equal to parse int, and we are good to go. So let's now go back to our browser and see what things are looking like now. Refresh the page, make sure we don't have any sort of console errors. So 111, we get our 7. We do our 2, just to make sure here, we actually do have a red here, so we'll have to revisit that in a second. Please enter a valid binary digit, and now we're actually going back here. So let's inspect what's happening here with the validity. Toggle validity. Well, I guess this only works in the case where something actually goes wrong once. So maybe instead of toggling it, we really just only want to ever add it if, yeah. We can also pass, we could pass the valid, we could pass valid itself, and we can just say that valid is true. Yeah, I was looking through the code here, but we're toggling the validity and we're not really checking for the validity of the input itself. So what if we set a default parameter here? Here we'll pass in the value of valid. Put that underneath this so it gets the most recent one. And here we can now write a ternary operator. If it's valid, we remove invalid, else we add it. See what this does now. Right, so if it's true, we remove it, and if it's false, right, false, valid. All right, let's keep going on here. Enter 111, we get this. Perfect. Now if we go back to 111, we convert it, we come back to a clean state. All right, so I think this about wraps up this project here. Again, a simple project. Hopefully you'll have fun with it. I'll go ahead and upload this video to my YouTube channel and hope to see you all there and start a discussion. And I'll see you all next week for another installment of these video series. Have a good one. One more thing I had to mention, there's actually still even a bit more refactoring we can do. We don't really need to have this valid variable anymore because if we do enter this, we return and we never get to this point anyway. So why don't we just pass in a literal Boolean value to toggle validity here. We can now remove this. We can remove the valid variable from up here, and we can also remove this entire check and simply just have this. Now if we go back to our browser, we do the same check that we did before. 111 gives us a 7. If we do a 2, we get our alert, and we also get the red. Again, if we do it again, we get right back to where we were before. So always good to be thinking about ways to refactor it if it makes sense, if it makes your code more clean. I'll see you all very soon.